My mom actually passed away 60 days before World Championships. And so as you can imagine, I was a 20-year-old girl, just completely shattered. My mom was someone who was the most important person in my life. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. And she really was a big reason why I dated and why I was so successful, and really just like the rock of our family, and just a phenomenal woman. And so the most important technique that I used was actually around controlling my language. I had to change the voice inside my head to these neutral, factual statements. So my mom is gone, you're still here. I have what it takes to compete. My heart is broken, but my legs, they're still strong. It was really understanding how to perform when you have the world of adversity in front of you.
Are you looking to take control of your mindset and perform at your best when operating under huge pressure? If so, then this episode is just for you. I am so excited to introduce you to Katelyn Good, a former world-class figure skater turned mental performance coach. As an athlete, Kate was a national champion in both Canada and Denmark and competed at 4 World Figure Skating Championships. After retiring from competitive sport, Kate transitioned into marketing, where she built and led multiple marketing teams, including helping lead one company to IPO. As a mental performance coach, Kate employs the principles and techniques used by the world's top athletes to control the negative, make astonishing comebacks, and deliver unshakable, consistent performance. Kate now works with high performers across industries like pharma, medicine, as well as aspiring and world-class athletes. Her journey highlights the power of mastering the mental game, and I believe this is something that we can all learn to do day to day. Kate, welcome to the Charlène Gisèle Show.
Thank you so much, Charlène, for having me. So excited to be here.
So excited to have you. I would love to dive straight in by asking you, when did you decide that you were going to become an athlete?
Oh my gosh. That takes me back a long time. I started figure skating when I was 3 years old, and my parents put us in every sport. So I did swimming, I did skating, I did gymnastics, ballet, softball, pretty much all that you can imagine. And as a kid, I always had this inner drive, this like little will to succeed and compete and be the best. And so I actually don't really remember a moment where I decided that I wanted to be an athlete, but I knew that I felt the most at home when I was on the ice. And I just truly loved skating. And I was actually never the best athlete. I was never the little girl that you'd look at and be like, oh, that one is going to make it. I was like 20 down the line of like this, no way. But I had a lot of heart and a lot of will and a lot of love for the game ultimately. And I think that's kind of what helped me continue moving forward, and just a drive to pursue the things that I wanted. And ultimately that was to compete at the Olympics.
And at what point did you get coached actually to do what you did?
I think we had private coaches from the age of around, I would say 10. But my career as an athlete really took off when I moved from Toronto to Montreal. I was 14 years old. We moved for my dad's job. So it really wasn't actually for my sport, but I was very fortunate to start skating at a club where they had some of the best coaches in the world. And that's really where my athletic prowess took off. So I was quite a late bloomer, actually. But that was really where it began. And just after that, I did struggle with some mental side of the game. And every time I could land on my jumps, I could do all my stuff in practice. But every time that it would come down to competition, I would just choke completely. Just fall on everything and do terrible. And so I was introduced actually to mental performance training quite early. My mom had brought in someone to help me start to visualize what I wanted. Because even in my visualizations, I was seeing myself fall. And he was like, you have control of this. You can choose this. And I was like, oh, is it just how it always happens? And he said, no. And so that was a really big turning point in my skating career of learning these mental techniques to get me to where I wanted to go. And I have my mom actually to thank for that.
So tell us more, Kate. You've introduced us to the concept of the mental game and visualization. Can you tell us more about what it meant to you and what it means for athletes, but also how that can be translated into other areas of our lives?
Yes. So visualization is something I would say is probably the most impactful tool that I've used in my life as an athlete, but also as just a mom, as a business person. And the reason I believe it's so powerful is because our mind can't actually tell the difference between what has happened and what we're imagining is happening. There's an amazing study out of the University of Chicago where they had this group of basketball players and they put them into 3 different groups. The first group practiced 3 throws physically for 6 weeks, and they saw a 24% improvement in their shots. The second group, they put them in, they just had the basketball player not even go to the court, but sit and just visualize themselves throwing 3 throws. And the third group, they had practice neither, so not mentally and not physically. But what is fascinating is that this second group who just visualized, so didn't even do any 3 throws at all, no training, no extra training, they saw a 23% improvement in their accuracy, which shows you that whether or not you're physically or mentally practicing something, it really demonstrates the ability of your mind and your subconscious to make the outcomes happen in the way that you do. So visualization is something that I incorporate in all of my athletes, even the young ones, so like 10, 12. And what's crazy is how fun that becomes for them and the impact that they can have. I did so as well with actually the birth of my second child. I had a very traumatic first birth. And so I really wanted to rewrite that story for myself. And as you can imagine, this is a really personal component of my life, especially as women who have had children, but also from the man's side as well. My partner knew that the first experience was not how we planned it. It was 5 days of labor, an emergency. It was just a mess. And he knew that his way to support me would be to help guide me through this type of work. And so I spent a lot of time understanding where the fear lied underneath that experience for me. And the way that I broke through that was actually starting to revisualize what I wanted to have happen, but I kept getting blocked. So I would try to see it in my mind and I couldn't see the birth. It was like my system wouldn't let me. And so I employed a couple other techniques that I've found really complement the visualization, which is one, writing. So I wrote down what I wanted to have happen. And then I actually used what I would call like game tape. So something that I really recommend a lot of people look into is watching their own game tape. You see this in the NFL. You see this in a lot of large sports organizations where they watch back their games, but you can do the same in your life, right? So for me in this instance, it was actually going on YouTube and watching people deliver naturally because that's what I wanted to achieve. And so I combined the watching it, so observing someone do the skill that I really wanted to achieve. I wrote down the outcome that I wanted to have, and then I visualized it every day pretty much leading up to when it happened. And I involved my partner, my support system in this process so that he felt a part of that and felt like he could support me. And so I've used it both from an athletic perspective, a real life perspective, and then obviously with the kids and the athletes that I teach.
I'm so grateful you shared such a personal story and the level of details as well, because I think it's so revealing. What I love about your approach is that you didn't go, well, I can't visualize something that I haven't done, aka I haven't had that natural birth, so I can't visualize it because I don't have a model. You went and looked for a model that already existed and visualized that. And the reason I wanted to highlight how powerful that technique is because very often when I mention that to clients, they say, but how can I visualize something that I haven't done the way I want to do it yet? And you've just nailed it, right? You use a model, so role modeling, looking at somebody else who's done it, but you can also use your imagination.
Exactly. And my suggestion there would be as specific as possible. So you really want to think about the sounds, the exact moment, the smells. But the other side of that is, how do you feel? How do you want to feel in that moment? And what does that power feel like? So for me, it was, I wanted to experience the power of my body, the complete power. And I had a reason why I wanted to achieve that. And fortunately, it happened exactly as I saw it. He was delivered in 4 hours with no epidural, no nothing. And he was this beautiful, perfect, healthy little boy. But you're totally right, is that I hear a lot of the time the same thing. How do I do something I've never done before? And the way that I think about that is almost like confidence. It's breaking confidence into the components of small things that you have done before. And so that's language with yourself, like, okay, I may not have achieved this big goal. I may not have skated at the Olympics. I may not have practiced as a lawyer. I may not have been in court for the first time. I may not have passed the test that I need to. But if you break that thing down into smaller components of what you have done, then you can start building that bank account, right? So I have done hard things, whatever that thing is for you. I have passed a test before, right? I have done well in this moment. I have, like, breaking it down to the things that make up that moment, I found is a really strong way to start building confidence around something you haven't done before.
Could we go back to your mindset when you were performing? Figure skating is so technical, so beautiful to watch because it looks so flawless and almost effortless, right? But that's the magic. It's to make it look so effortless. Walk us through how you actually visualize and use that technique in a very sort of step-by-step way. So did you do it the night before? Did you do it the morning before? I would love to know and go inside Kate's mind, if that's an option.
It can be a very interesting place.
But
in terms of like preparation and visualization, there are many ways you can do it. So it is finding what works for you. Some people prefer to do it daily. Some people prefer to do it every week. It's really what makes you feel good and not adding additional pressure. I'm a huge proponent of addition by subtraction. So instead of adding more positive things into your life, actually reducing the negative. And so, but we can get back to that at another point. But to go back to answer your question, for me, there were some critical moments that worked in my life. So for me, it was actually visualizing every time my head hit the pillow. So I would, right before bed, I would sit on the edge of my bed and I would run through my program in vivid detail, each edge, the music, the feelings, the emotions. I could see, I skated with a partner, so I could see his face, his facial expression. So really, really detailed as I could get. And I did that every night before I went to bed, usually about a month out before the competition. So that was kind of like my pre-work. But I wouldn't just picture the competition itself, the skating. I would picture the moment that I got on the bus. So usually what happens is you stay at a hotel near the competition, you have a bus ride to the arena, you have a warm-up, you have a 6-minute warm-up on the ice, and then you actually compete. And so it was actually visualizing from the moment I got on that bus and putting on my headphones, getting into my zone, all the way of like what happens when I step off the bus, who do I look at, where do I look? When I get into the arena, how do I put my bag down? Like, I'm a really big rituals person. So like, how do I put my bag down? Where do I put my skates? How do I hang my dress? So really, really getting detailed, and then all the way up to the actual competition and skating. So that piece, and that can apply to anything really in life. Let's take an example that for those who aren't figure skaters, because I don't know how many of your audience are figure skaters. But the same thing could happen if you have, let's say, a big presentation at work, or if you're going into the courtroom. You can think through each moment from like the way that you are going to have your breakfast, what you're going to have for breakfast, what you're going to wear, how you're going to then get into your car, the drive to wherever you're going, opening your laptop, those types of things. You can think through and see all those things in advance of the actual thing. And then for me at the competition, I always did just a run through of the program. I would tie up my skates and be thinking about it. And when I was finished tying my skates, again, I would close my eyes, really see it, and then walk over to the rink. So there was always like multiple instances where I would do it leading up to that competition.
And one thing I would love to ask you is, how did you combat the intrusive thoughts that would lead you to yourself falling, for example? Because I'm sure those thoughts might have been there.
Yeah, of course. We all have self-doubt. We all have negative thoughts, even the best of the best. 80% of our thoughts are negative, but it's really about how you can control those. And so as part of that visualization, I actually saw things that, not that I thought were going to happen that would have been bad, but how I would have reacted if they didn't go my way. So I'll give you an example of one. So we would do this usually about, say, 3 months before competition. We would go through an exercise that we called adversity tolerance. And it's about building your tolerance to when things go wrong, because inevitably they will. That's for sure. And so what we would actually do is think about the things that would set us off. So one of the things that I always thought about was afraid of was my skates not making it to the rink, or not making it because we had to check them underneath the airplane. And so I would actually practice what that would feel like, what I would do in that instance, how I would react. And it did happen on 2 occasions, actually. And so in those moments, I had already prepared. So I wasn't frazzled. I wasn't like, how am I going to skate? What am I going to do? Letting the whole, we're not going to qualify then for the world championships. Or what am I, like, instead of getting into my mind and letting my narrative dictate, it was like, okay, my skates have not arrived. That is the fact. So going from your either positive or negative statements back to this neutral middle ground, which is the facts. What is true? My skates have not arrived. I have 7 hours before this competition. I still am in control of my warm-up. So all those things are true. And so I would practice. So I would run through everything, do my visualization, put my dress on, everything. Literally the only time that I know I cannot compete is if they call my name and my skates have not arrived. I have up until that moment. And so they did arrive, by the way. But
I was on the edge of my seat here. I was like, tell me.
10 minutes before. But imagine had I let my mind go to all these places and give, oh, my skates right here, I can't compete. We're never going to world championships. And getting in this circle. But instead, I kept myself in what is true. What is true right now is that they are not here, but I can still do these things until the moment that they call my name. And so that way, when I only had 10 minutes before, and this is a European championship, this is not a small regional skate. This is like determining whether or not we qualify to Worlds and the Olympics. And so it was really, I only had 10 minutes to get my mind back in a place where, okay, my skates are on now and now we got to go. But I did that pre-work, that adversity tolerance beforehand. So it is about, in those visualizations, thinking about things that could actually go wrong. So in a presentation, as an example, what if someone interrupts me and asks me a question I don't know the answer to? How do you react in that moment? So you can go through these scenarios so that when they arise, you know how you are going to handle them in that moment, and you've already thought through a little bit of that response. So it takes away that fear.
You know, I'm so glad that you brought that up because well, I've never done any kind of figure skating, and I look like a Bambi on ice if I did. I don't think it would be a pretty sight. But the one thing that I did use is very similar to not receiving skates is when I was practicing for trail running, I actually had quite a bad fall. Nothing catastrophic, but I did fall and hurt my knee quite bad. And it was a bit frightening in the moment for a few seconds. Falling is always a bit scary. And so what I did after that fall, when I was visualizing myself for my next run to prepare for my next trail run, I actually visualized myself falling again, but I only did it so that I would be a little bit more tolerant to the adversity of the fall if I were to fall again, because it was my actual first race fall and it really set me back. I had a few seconds of, being a bit overwhelmed, and I just thought, well, there is a very strong chance that I might fall again. It's a natural path. When you do trail running, it can happen. So yes, I can visualize myself to be more mindful, more careful. But what if I were to fall again? How could I fall again, but take less time to be back on my feet and be less shaken by it? And I actually visualized myself falling a few times, and I felt more confident about the possibility that I could fall and be okay quicker. I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah,
I found that
exactly right. Mm-hmm. And knowing too, like, what are your triggers? So is it something that someone could say? Is it that like there's traffic and you're late and you're like frustrated or you're feeling anxious? Like, what are the things that you know about yourself that sets you off, right? So is it not being in control? Is it having someone say something about your whatever that thing is? And so understanding like what your triggers are, and then being able to know, okay, if this thing happens, well, what are my options? What do I do?
And do you use techniques like sequencing? What I mean by that is when I've worked with other athletes in the past, we use terminology around what we call the sequence of success. So we were working on step by step, including the visualization, but also down to what they'll eat at night, how they'll hydrate, what time they'll take their shower, and what temperature would be set. The fact that their shoes and everything would be prepared the night before and hang in a certain way. So we really sequence everything to minimize the amount of decision making, to minimize the amount of decision fatigue, and to keep every possible energy and focus to the game. Is that something you've done before as well?
I think it's really individual. So for me, I'm very similar, it seems, to you in that regard, where like I like to have everything planned out. I like put my clothes out the night before. I know exactly where I'm going to put where I'm going to put my skates, or how I'm going to put my laptop. I like to know those things. Though that for me makes me feel prepared and feel calm. I have worked with some other athletes who feel like that actually does the opposite for them. It makes them more concerned and aware. Oh, did I do that? Did I put that thing? Oh my gosh, is that going to mean I'm not going to do well this time? Like, because I didn't put my right foot on first, right? Or I didn't make my bed, or I didn't eat, or like, because what can happen then too is, especially when you're traveling internationally, if you always have 2 eggs and then you get there and there's no eggs.
Oh, then that's it.
Yeah, it's real. Like, it sounds so trivial, but it can really set somebody off when they're under that level of pressure. And so I think it is about understanding you like the things that work for you and testing them. So try one time where you've thought through everything, you know exactly what you do, you're prepared, you know what you're going to have, you know what you're going to drink, you know where your water will is going to be. And then you could test other one, maybe in a situation that has less depending on it, and try the opposite and just kind of go with the flow and see what happens. And that way you can kind of test and iterate yourself and find that maybe there are certain areas that you're like, I don't care what I eat. As long as I have water, then I'm good to go. But I really care about knowing what I'm wearing the next day, and that my bag is already packed. So just kind of finding the things that really are important to you in your process, I think makes a big difference.
Could you perhaps give us a specific example where you found that mental game preparation was actually a key factor in your ability to win, to compete, perform, to thrive under pressure?
Yes. I will take you back to a very life-altering moment of my life. My mom actually passed away 60 days before World Championships in 2011. And so as you can imagine, I was a 20-year-old girl, just completely shattered. My mom was someone who was the most important person in my life. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. And she really was a big reason why I skated and why I was so successful, and really just like the rock of our family, and just a phenomenal woman. And so I really was in complete distraught. And this is actually where, for the second time, mental performance got brought into my life, but really in a larger moment. And it actually is the reason why I do the work I do today, is because my mental performance coach, her name is Stephanie Hanlon, she was brought into my life to help me truly understand how you can use your mind despite anything, even the most tragic things that come in your way, that you can get through them, and you can not only that, but thrive through them. And so the most important technique that I used was actually around controlling my language. And so, as I alluded to before, we know both positive and negative thinking. We know that positive thinking works some of the time, but we know that with 100% certainty, negative thinking works negatively 100% of the time, right? So, but there is something that exists in between. And there is a book by Trevor Mohad. It's called It Takes What It Takes. And he has coined this term as neutral thinking. I didn't know, while I was living this, I didn't realize that it was called something. I learned this later, that it's called neutral thinking. But it was really the difference between me competing and succeeding and just letting circumstance take over. And so what I learned in that time was that, and for anyone that's lived through something really challenging, whether it's big or small, like most of the time when everyone's like, everything's going to be okay, time heals, like you are going to be great, you're like, I really don't want to hear that right now. Like I just lost the most important person in my life. I just lost my job. What are this big thing, the last thing I want to hear is someone telling me that it's going to be fine, when right now I do not feel fine at all. And so what I did in that moment was I actually went back to what is true. So can I still skate? Yes. Can I still compete? Yes. And so I had to change the voice inside my head to these neutral, truth-based, factual statements. So my mom is gone. You're still here. I have what it takes to compete. My heart is broken, but my legs, they're still strong. And I trust my training. I trust in my partner. And so when I changed this way that I spoke to myself, it all came down to what was true. And then I could focus only on that. And that was what it was present. That was what's true in that moment. And in that day, I actually delivered the best skate of my life, because my body was just overtaken by this sense of like a force beyond myself, this sense of calm. I could feel every edge, every note. I was so in that moment, more than I had actually ever been. And when that music stopped and we raised our hands, I knew in that moment that I actually uncovered something that no title could ever give me. It was really understanding how to perform when you have the world of adversity in front of you. And I owe a lot of that to learning to control my language. And this applies to anything that you do in life. I always, as we talked a little bit about before, 80% of our thoughts are negative. And so one of the simplest ways that you can do to change the way that you think, to change the voice inside your head, is just actually not externalizing negativity. And this is a super simple step. Instead of being like, it's so hot out, I can't do it. That's a judgment, right? Neutral removes the judgment. It removes the bias of your emotions And what it allows you to do is get to that fact. So no, it's 32 degrees out and I've trained in this weather before. That's the fact. Not that it's hot and it's uncomfortable. Those are all judgments of the situation. And so one of the things that I always start with when I'm thinking about a simple way to someone to move into a way that they change the language in their life is actually just removing the negative. So removing where it's like, I can't do this. I don't think I'll ever. I don't have time. It's not worth it. People won't care what I have to say. I'm a klutz. Don't mess up this thing. So just not vocalizing that negativity can make a transformational difference in your life. And many of us actually don't even realize how much we vocalize negativity. So you can think it, as we said, like everyone has negative thoughts. The best of us do at all times, at multiple times during the day for a whole bunch of different reasons. But if you can just stop yourself from saying it out loud, you remove the power of that. We know that saying something out loud actually has 10 times more power than just thinking it. And something negative is 4 to 7 times more powerful on your subconscious than something positive. And so if you say that negative thing out loud, I'm probably going to get sick, you've just perpetuated the thing by 40 to 70x that you don't want to have happen, that it will happen, just by putting it externally. So that's one of the first steps I do and recommend people to try, is actually just not saying stuff that is negative out loud.
I was so moved by the statement that you made. My heart is broken. My legs are strong. I felt that so deeply when you were sharing that statement, and just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge, first of all, your candor about such a personal story, and to really acknowledge how powerful that statement is.
You.
I was wondering as well if you could walk us through how that neutral thinking has helped you to navigate performance anxiety. So here you shared a very intense personal story, and a very adverse situation, a tragic moment in your life. What about those moments where perhaps it's the pressure, it's the night before the World Championship, and you know that you could be in bed by 10 p.m. with a warm blanket and the chamomile to make your coach happy, right? That was the plan, right? Okay, that was the plan. You were going to be in bed, and by 10:15, you were going to be, sleeping like a baby and have your 8 hours and all your REM sleep and feeling. That was the plan, and the reality, it's 1 a.m., you're staring at the ceiling and you think, oh my God, I'm going to, fall flat on my butt, or whatever else you were thinking. A, have you had those nights? And B, how did you combat performance anxiety, which whether you're a figure skater or whether you're a C-suite executive going into a pitch meeting, this is the same kind of anxiety we're talking about here.
Totally. How did I combat that? So I like to think about this type of mental performance training actually as like preventative psychology. So there's a lot happening in the world right now, which I think is phenomenal, about the topic of mental health and anxiety, depression, and really bringing light to these things that a lot of people struggle with. And so the way that I think about the work that I do is actually what happens before that. So how do we actually help you not get to that phase of burnout? How do we help you not get to the anxiety, the depression, although those are clinical things that I know many people struggle with, but trying to give you the tools to be in the best place mentally before those things can come into play. And so in those moments when I was feeling that performance anxiety, one of the things definitely was staying true to those factual statements. It seems like such a simple thing, but really, if you can get your mind back, that bounce back rate from the moment you have that thought back to, okay, no, I have trained for 721 days for this day. I can do this. I have what it takes to perform. My legs are in the best shape that they've ever been. So really, again, getting yourself back to what is true right now, not what your future state is, not what you think could happen, not the narrative you told yourself, but getting back to like what is true. But the work that I do actually before that to combat that anxiety is actually building almost like your mental bank account, so that when those thoughts do come, which they will, you can rewrite the script in your head around what you're telling yourself, and you do that based on evidence. So I actually believe that belief is earned, and so I'm looking at evidence. I'm looking at the evidence that I have, that I've done, that then can tell me that I believe. So I believe that this confidence is, as we said, that component of the small piece of evidence that you've done these things, that you know that the next thing that you can do is going to happen probably in the way that you want it to. So I used to say, I don't believe in myself, I have evidence. And I have evidence because I've looked for it. I haven't left my attitude up to chance. I've deliberately sought out the things, the memories of my past, how I talked to myself, to build up this mental bank account, so that when I am in that position of like staring at the ceiling and like, oh my God, I don't think I can do this, how am I going to embrace this occasion? I then have awareness of that statement that I'm talking to myself, right? Which is the first step, seeing that you're actually saying these critical statements to yourself, and then saying, okay, but I do have evidence that I have done this and that and this thing. Okay, yes. So it helps you get back to the place where when your mind wanders that way, you can bring it back. And so it's really about like, so a question I always get is like, how do you, as we talked about before, like, how do I believe something if I've never done it? Or like, how do you cultivate this confidence? And I like to do so in 3 ways. So the first one is actually about looking for memories from your past. And you can do this as an exercise like today, so that when these moments, and I would suggest doing it before you get into a big event or before you have a big presentation, because then you can actually have the time to think through these things, so that the day before that thing, you have this kind of bank account to go back into. So looking for memories of your past, so being selective about the constructive memories where you put in effort. Maybe it's just effort, right? I just walked out of that class and I asked a really good question. Bank that, right? Thinking about the last hour of your life, like, what did I just do really well? You know what? My kid was in a tantrum, yelling, screaming at me, and I was able to calm her or him down in that moment by using soft language and getting to the root of why she was upset. So just small little pieces of where you've put effort, small successes, even progress, right? The second part of that is about looking at the stories that you tell yourself in the present. So I'm good at this, I'm bad at that, I hate doing this, I like doing that. One that I always say that is really terrible is like, I'm terrible at mental math. But that's a belief that I have about myself, right? They're beliefs that we hold. And those beliefs structure our actions, and those actions then structure our results. And so you really need to get underneath, what are the things that you tell yourself? What is the story that you're telling yourself about these things? And is it really true? Yes or no, right? And then you can start rewriting that thing. And the third piece of this method, which I call the PPF, past, present, and future. How are you thinking about yourself in the future? So you get to be the script writer, the producer of this very sophisticated video production studio called your imagination. And so you get to be this inner director. And so when you have these 3 pieces, so now I've looked at my past, I've looked at my present, and I've looked at the future that I tell myself, and I start banking those memories and cultivating what I want, the stories that I'm going to tell myself. In those moments of performance anxiety, I can now say, okay, oh my God, I can't do this. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do if I fall? And your mind starts racing. You start saying, okay, stop. And you can literally have like something in your mind that you have a stop sign. Okay, stop. Okay, that's okay. And then I'm going to go back and say, okay, I have done this hard thing before. I have skated in front of a group of 10 people and it went great. I have presented in front of 2 people and it went great. It's the same thing, right? And so you can go back to these small moments where I have negotiated with my child before. You're negotiating all the time with your kids. So if you're going into a big negotiation, similar principles, right? Like understanding their root, understanding how they're framing, how the other seems to be feeling, right? So it gives you, in the moment where you need it the most, this evidence that you have done these things. Even if it's not the same thing, you have done things that are similar, and you can rely on that previous success to get you out of that kind of situation.
I love the 3-step process, and this is a technique I use as well in terms of personal editing. So I would get clients, right? I would get clients to close their eyes and visualize actually being in the cinema room, a bit like you said, the video, the studio of your imagination, and to actually edit their behavior and to visualize themselves behaving differently and to make those tweaks and adjustments in the behavior. And with public speaking, I do it in a way where I would get my client to visualize their last speech, and we tweak the sound, and we tweak the hand gesture, and we tweak the head, and we tweak the eye contact, and we tweak the poses, and then keep on tweaking it until the delivery is as flawless can be. And then we take that mental image and we apply it to the future event. So that's very similar in a different context, right?
Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful.
And it works. It really does.
It is. It's crazy, but it works. And it's even hard to understand how. I use this even when I'm parking. So when you go downtown Montreal, this is weird, but just go with me for a second.
I like weird. Go for it, Kate. Go all with it.
Downtown Montreal is constantly under construction. But when I go there, before I leave the house, I see the parking spot literally right outside where I need to go. I'm like, all right, I'll be fine. My husband is like, I always have to this makes absolutely no sense. How do you get parking right outside everywhere we go every time? And I'm like, I just see it. I know it's going to happen. And I can't explain why that works, but it does. So it's a very weird thing of even parking. You throw it into the universe, I guess. I don't know.
And how do you preserve that really precious mind from getting into overdrive and potentially burnout? And what I'm referring to here is I've seen the dark side of sports as well. And I think in many ways, just like corporate executive burnout, I've also seen many athletes burn out.
Totally.
Is that something that you've ever experienced or known anyone to experience athletic burnout? And can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I have definitely been in dark places in my athletic career for a few different reasons. I wouldn't say actually because of athletic burnout. I think it was more based on the situation with coaches and things like that. But I definitely have known athletes who have burned out just by driving too hard and not really understanding what they're working towards or having external forces being the motivation behind what they do. And so the way that I have, I think, avoided that is always going back to having value-based goals. And so I spent a lot of time and a lot of work really getting clear on the things that I value. And those values can also change over time, right? They can, and as for me, they definitely have. But during my athletic career, I had really strong values of integrity, to myself, and love, actually. And so those two things, when I aligned the goals that I had with the values that I held, I found that made me feel, even in the really dark days where I was probably not treating my body in the way that I should have, that I was pushing way too hard, not focused on recovery, not fueling my body with the appropriate things, but just pushing and pushing because like I really wanted this thing. Even in those days, I felt that I was still progressing to something, and in the small pieces of that, they were still aligned with the integrity that I had set with myself. And so it kept me aligned with the things that mattered to me as an individual. And so when you have those like very deep pieces, there's still pieces of things that you're doing in your day that are working towards things that align with you as an individual, as a person, your values. And that, I think, helped me avoid getting to a place where I had to stop because I was so burnt out. So that would be something I think I would suggest people do. And it is actually quite a hard exercise. If you've ever, Brene Brown has like a very, very complete list of like most values. It's a great place to start, and just kind of, you'll want to circle like 10 or 15 of them as you look at them. And the best way to do it is actually just read the list and just circle the things that relate to you, resonate with you. But you really want to try to narrow those down to like 2 or 3. And then from there, align your goals with those things. So let's say that one of your highest values is creativity. That's what you really value. That's what fills your soul. It makes you feel great. And something that could align with that is maybe that you want to write a book or start a podcast, or maybe it's that you decide that you wanted to do a painting, all those things, right? Or maybe it's just even writing for yourself, whether that's on LinkedIn or in a document. So if let's say that book is your goal and your value is creativity, even in those days when you just really don't think you can push through and you're just so exhausted and you're just feel like there's no hope and nothing to turn back to, or you don't even really know the reason why, you're like, okay, but my value is to be creative every day. And was I a bit creative today? Did I get 4 sentences on the page? Okay, that's in alignment with where I'm going. And that can help you just feel like you're still progressing, even though the goal might feel miles and miles away.
You know, I love that you mentioned that. And I think it's so important to have value-based goals. And it's actually been completely transformational for me in terms of recovering from burnout, because what I did, and I would love to share that technique actually, if that can be helpful, is I did a bit of an audit, right? And I realized that I was in what I coined a personal value deficit. And I was in a work ethic value surplus. So let me explain.
Wow.
I had never thought about it that way up until the point that I was working on values with my coach. And I was looking at my week and my workload, and underpinning each value attached to my action. And there were tons, leadership, impact, service, justice, so many values, great values, all there, right? And so many actions connected to the values. And then I was looking at days off, non-working days, or evenings, dare I say. And I couldn't really connect actions to values.
Wow.
It was exhaustion and sort of trying to put the pieces back together of my exhausted brain to function tomorrow. That's not value-based action.
Yeah.
Wow. So instead, I said, okay, out of 6 values that I have for my work ethics, I don't have to worry about that because I'm doing a lot more. I'm at least going to have that. So I'm going to have at least 3 actions connected to personal values of interest that are outside of work ethics value each non-working day. So I started small. I said, well, romance is important to me. So I'm going to have a date night with my partner. Or if I can't have a whole night, it will be an intimate moment. And then I added fun. And it would be something that makes me laugh. I love comedy and I love laughter. It would be doing something funny or being funny intentionally in that moment. And then I added creativity. and I started to work on things that were more creative, right? And I built up my value repertoire for personal life value. And that really helped me to bring back the sort of unicorn of a balance that we can never get. You know, I call it the unicorn because it seems why I add this word balance kind of, you know, it frustrates me, I think, because it just seems so whimsical. But it sort of at least struck more of a balance, for lack of a better word, of work ethics and personal values. I would love your thoughts on that.
Whoa, this is such a beautiful story. I am in complete agreement. And I think that, one, I acknowledge you for getting to that point where you brought awareness to yourself. I think what you did by looking at your calendar is something I would actually challenge us all to do. If you say that family is one of your highest values, but your calendar doesn't reflect any of that time, you need to have a hard look at yourself and really tell the truth too, right? Like you did, right? You're like, wow, I've got all this effort and energy and value into how I work and how I show up for my work in service of other people, but I'm not serving myself in the same way. And I think that it's a very eye-opening exercise when you say these are the things that matter, but is it really reflective in the time and the energy that I spend? Are those things the same? And it can be very like, wow, I thought this is important to me. Is it? It's also, is it? Or is it just because people tell me that I think family should be important, right? And there's no judgment there. This is you. This is telling the truth with yourself and just being honest. And then aligning to your point about getting really clear and using that to realign your life and the actions. But I think what you said, that the most important piece of this is there's values, right? There's our goals, and there's behavior. And the behavior piece, which you mentioned, was like, actually, what is something in the next 24 hours of my off day that I can do to work towards this thing? And that, for me, is actually a difference maker, because it's one thing to say, these are my values and these are my goals, but actually putting them into action and holding yourself accountable for those things is really probably, my guess would be, why you felt such a huge change. It's because you actually took action towards those things, which is phenomenal.
I think it's so important to really make sure that you can be quite disciplined in your action and to follow through. And that actually brings me to a topic I would love to explore with you, is the importance of discipline in your life to achieve your goal. And the reason for that is, you know, whenever I coach or work with athletes, discipline is something that they've fallen in love with through trial and error, but also because they know it brings them success. Whereas what I've noticed, which I find very interesting, is with the more general population, perhaps, if we talk about discipline, it feels like punishment. There is Benisuti, which is quite negative, right?
Yeah.
To extraordinarily disciplined professionals, right? You would need to be very disciplined to be a professional. But disciplined in one way, work, does not mean discipline in other ways, what you do at night to relax or what you do on your days off. So I find there is a paradox sometimes between, you know, very disciplined workers that actually have very undisciplined behaviors in other aspects of their lives. Tell us about what you think discipline is to you, how important it is, and whether you've noticed any patterns.
Wow. This is a big topic. I believe that your discipline that you have with yourself, in whatever way that it manifests for you, the discipline for me will dictate your future, honestly. I think that it is the way in which you achieve the things that you want. For me, I am highly disciplined in pretty much all aspects of my life, because if I go back to the concept of evidence, those are the way that I have achieved the things that I want, which is, again, it goes back to one of my highest values, which is integrity. And that's doing what you say you're going to do. And for me, that most important person that I owe that to is myself. So if I say that I'm going to do something, and even if it's as small as making my bed in the morning, right? Or not hitting snooze. When you make a commitment to yourself in that way and you break it, subconsciously you're just eroding that trust with yourself. So when that really matters and you ask yourself to commit to something, like whether it's going on when you're trying to hit 100 grams of protein a day, or you're trying to work out 4 days a week, or you've taken a stance on no gossip in your life. You've said, I'm going to stand against people. I don't want to be associated with anyone that talks about other people behind them back. Like, if you haven't built that trust with yourself for the small things, how are you going to trust yourself for the big ones? And so it starts with the commitments, the very small ones that you make to yourself. And so that's what I mean by your discipline tells me about your futures, because those things that you've decided to be disciplined about tell me that these goals really matter to you. And ultimately, I think that comes to, for me, two things. One is standards. So what are the standards that you have set for yourself, and how do we raise those so that when you go on vacation, all of the work that you've just done, eating super, super well and clean and hitting your protein goals and drinking enough water, that they don't go out the door when you're on vacation. It's like, no, you've set the standard. We don't, just because we're in a different, hot, beautiful place doesn't mean that I let those things go. When I'm on vacation, I still go to the gym every other day while I'm there, because for me, that's a standard that I've set for myself. And that was so how do we raise those standards to a place where you've raised to that occasion and you've set this for you? This is your new baseline, right? The other piece of that for me is actually about choice. And I believe that choice truly is actually an illusion. There is really only few choices you can make to get to the goals that you want to reach. And so if I set my goal to be an author, or if I set my goal to be the best lawyer that the UK has ever seen, or if I set my goal to coach a team at the 2026 Olympics, right? There are relatively few choices that are going to get me on that path to get me to that thing, right? There are options. So the difference is, an option is like, which restaurant are we going to go to tonight? Whether or not I go to Bobby or Susie's, we're still going, right? But a choice is, when I'm at that restaurant, am I sticking to the things that are going to fuel my body so that tomorrow I'm able to do the work that I need to do, whether that's reading or literature or working with my teams? Like, I think there are very few choices to get you there. And so those things for me play hand in hand. The standard you've set for yourself and the choices that you have to make to get you to the goal that you say really matters to you. But again, it's going back to that truth with yourself. Is this something you really want? And then, what are you willing to let go of? The hard things. And it takes hard choices. These are not easy things, right? It's easy to say, I'm not going to watch Netflix at night and I'm going to go to my computer. But doing that thing can be freaking hard. Everyone else is watching TV and you're like, I got to go write my LinkedIn post. See you later. Those things are hard. But ultimately, if your goal is to be, let's say, one of the best in the world at something, then it does take those things. And I'm not saying that at all times of your life you need to be so hard. There are times and seasons in your life that you need to also let go a little bit, but within those same standards that you've set for yourself. And on the flip side of that, also being just gentle with yourself and kind. Like, you are human. We are human. There will be times when you actually have just had enough. You're like, okay, I'm just going to eat this whole chocolate bar sitting on the couch watching TV, because that's really what I need right now. And it's also okay to just let yourself have those moments and know that tomorrow, or like maybe even in that same day, it doesn't mean that the whole day is gone. It means in that moment you've made a choice, and then you can make the next right choice after that.
Yes, and I think that's important not to spiral out of control, because otherwise you can have a bit of a fuck it narrative. Forgive my friend. But right, I see this with my clients a lot. Well, I've had one biscuit, I might as well have the whole packet of chocolate. I've had one glass, I might as well have the bottle, and then fuck it, right?
Yeah. And then the next day, yeah.
And then the next day, well, I'm not going to work out because, I've been really unhealthy, so I might as well be completely unhealthy this week.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is actually it sets you back. Whereas, as you said, if you acknowledge the fact that, okay, in this moment, I might have made a choice that doesn't align with my midterm to long-term goal, which is to maintain a healthy body, I can still rectify that relatively quickly by making a next choice that would be really empowered and really wise and really aligned, and therefore restore the sort of overall state of affairs, as opposed to going to the fuck it, right?
Exactly. Or giving yourself those seasons in advance, right? Like sometimes you can play that game with your head where you're like, okay, my go period is within the next 3 months. I'm making every right choice. This is what I'm committing to myself. I've written down this goal. And at the day at month 3, okay, then I'm going to give myself 24 hours just to, it can be 24 hours, it could be a week, it could be whatever you want. But giving yourself those seasons of ebb and flow so that you've said, okay, I'm really into it these 3 months. That's what I'm committing to myself. And what I usually find is at the end of that 3 months, when you're like, okay, now I can like take a couple weeks and just reset. I always find at the end of that 3, I'm like, oh no, I just gonna keep going. I just did this for 3 months. I can keep this going. And then it raises that standard. And now you're like, okay, I actually don't need that big release that I thought that I did in the same ways that I did. And maybe that I've learned that the way that I nurture myself is now different, right? Or you can play with those things and use them as ways to set parameters for those seasons for yourself. And those seasons don't have to follow actual months, weeks. It could be whatever time frame you want.
Can I ask you one last question?
Sure.
I was looking at your gorgeous photos before our recording, and you look not only beautiful, but so confident on ice. There is something about you that is so powerful, and I can really feel that confidence. How did you get to that point? And is that confidence as internal as external? Because I know sometimes there is a bit of a difference. You can be extremely confident. That doesn't mean you feel extremely confident.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious, how did you cultivate that?
Sure. So I think there are actually many myths around confidence, I think. I actually don't think that like you can go from being confident on the ice and just dominating that piece, and you step off the ice and into your relationship and you're not, right? Confidence really is quite situation specific. I think just because you're confident in one area of your life doesn't mean that you are in all of them. I think some of the ways that I cultivated that were what we've talked about. So really being highly selective of the stories that I tell myself, looking to my past for success, an exercise that this is more recent, but it's called, it's from his name is Dr. Nate Zinzer. He does what's called the ESP. So asking yourself on a daily basis, where did I put effort? What did I get right? And where did I make progress? And I found that that's actually a really fun exercise to do with your kids, like at the dinner table. Like, tell me where you did effort today. And just like a quick way to have them start thinking about their life in a little bit of a different way. But to go back to your question, I actually had a performer self. So this is like a little bit of an alter ego. So I became someone else on the ice. It's part of the performance. You step into this, it's still you. It's not a different, it's actually maybe the most true version of you in many ways. where there's different pieces of people that I admired, or whether they're fictional people or not. And I brought in different elements to kind of build this character around who I became on the ice. And there's small pieces of like, when I turned that on, it was like the movement of putting on my lipstick was like them putting on it's like a totem. Like as soon as that lipstick went on, the performer takes over. And so and this is actually a tactic that like anyone can use. There is, his name is Todd Herman. He actually has a whole book on this concept, but it was something that I practiced before ever falling on his work. But essentially, 75% of our brain is dedicated to the visual cortex. And so if you can think about back to the time when you were very young, like all we did was had these great imaginations, and we played, and we really played our own game. And so it's tapping into the way that we used to learn and the creativeness that is inside all of us, to create this version of you that you can step into, whether that's putting it on for a presentation, or if you're a coach, every time that you coach somebody, you bring your coach self, and maybe you give yourself a different name. There's one of the NFL players, like the American football, his name is Justin Jefferson. He talks about, the guy's name is Jet. So he's really this like very well reserved, calm person, but on the football field, he becomes Jet. He puts on his chain, and for him, that chain is his totem. And he steps into this character, which again is him. This is really part of him, but he becomes this confident, big, boisterous, loud. He does this dance. Like he becomes this whole alter ego, which allows him to perform at the level that he can. And it's something that I think actually anyone could use. And there's ways to actually go about creating that for yourself, which would probably be a different podcast. But happy to jump into that with you of how I created her. But it was really powerful for me, because then all the other things, that my doubts, my stories that I told the Kate version of me didn't apply anymore, because that's not her, right? So it's a very fun tool to work with, actually.
It's very powerful. I love that you brought it up. And, as you mentioned, not everybody is a figure skater, but everybody can learn from this. In a corporate context, I've used that tool in ways that can seem so trivial on surface level, but actually are so profound psychologically. Ever since I started my corporate career, and even now when I continue a slightly different career, which is more into the hypnotherapy and the coaching, I've maintained the same ritual, which is when I'm speaking publicly or I'm connecting with a client, I put on my red lipstick. And it's,
yes, there you go.
Right? And for me, in that moment, I know I'm about to speak and say something that has an impact. So it's a very conscious choice. It's attached to, my lips, which is how I communicate. And for that few minutes where I apply it, I go into a bit of a mindfulness moment where I set myself up for success for the day. And I'm very intentional about the fact that the words I'm going to use today are going to serve an impact. And that means a lot. That is my little mini version of the alter ego, and it sets me up for performance.
Totally. And it doesn't have to be something like lipstick. It could be a special pair of earrings, a ring. It could be a shirt. It could be, it could really be anything. But it has to have meaning for you.
Yeah. It can also be a smell or a scent, right? It doesn't even have to be something you put on, because
totally.
I've had, client who said, "Oh, well, great for you. What do I do?" And with them, what I've worked on is, for example, a certain aftershave that makes them feel really empowered, or a color. So, I was working with an investment banker whose color was red. And if you visualize that really vivid blood-like red, he felt super empowered. Like, he was going for it. And so we visualized those hues of red before going into the office, and he felt on top of his game. So even if you have no accessories, even if you just have, plain suit, you can still see red if it helps you.
Exactly. So, well, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for this conversation. And I just want you to let us know where you would like our audience to connect with you.
Sure. Best place to reach me is on LinkedIn, Katelyn Good. Please connect with me there. Send me a direct message. Happy to answer any questions you have on anything we talked about, or just if you're struggling really with performance or confidence, or want to learn a little bit about how to visualize for yourself. I do also like guided visualizations, like really short ones. So happy to walk anyone through that. But please feel free to connect with me, and I'm here as a resource and hopefully can help you on your journey to greatness.
Thank you, Kate. Speak soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening in. I have a quick question for you now. What do you want to hear from me for our new latest episodes? Just give me a quick comment and let me know what you would like to hear about. Which topic are you passionate about? Which topic do you feel we haven't covered yet and you really want us to cover? Please let me know. This show is for you, and I want to know what you want to listen to. I can't wait to hear your feedback. Thank you.